Well, hello anybody watching, and good evening, Glen. How are you holding up?
Yes, good. Thanks. Yeah, thanks very much, Clinton. Thanks for helping me arrange this for tonight. I'm good as per last week, sitting in the shed looking a bit washed out with the lighting. But yes, no, I'm good, mate. I'm good.
Yes, as usual, we're doing all the Marilyn Monroe production and all of that sort of stuff. I just thought it would be useful to touch on a few points that we didn't cover last Tuesday because it went for a long time, an hour and a half, and I just thought a bit quick postscript to deal with things, a number of points, just 3 points that I think are important. The first is what I'd call a public interest issue, which is about the safety of APTA operations when it was under your control, when you were the CEO of APTA, because members of the public will be out there thinking, well, CASA's out there preventing carnage in the skies, and there must have been a safety issue. So we'll delve into that a bit. Then a couple of points that I think are quite personal to you, and that's a string of correspondence that ended with your position in APTA being described as untenable by someone in CASA, and there was subsequently an apology for the unintended language or the reasonable interpretation of the language, and also finally a couple of allegations that were made to you about you under parliamentary privilege by the then CASA CEO Shane Carmody, because again I know that that to you are personally quite distressing, and I can understand why. So that's where we intend to head. Again, we'll just see how it goes. And again, my apologies if there are any technical glitches. If we now know that if I drop out for any technical reason, and you can continue, and I'll get back into the system as quickly as I can.
As long as you don't ask me a yes or no question, Clinton.
Okay.
There'll be an open-ended question to ask me before you drop out.
Yeah, we'll do that. And also, again, apologies because the short duration of these things can't really do justice to the complexity of the issues with which we're dealing, nor the stress and that they cause you, and hopefully reliving them isn't going to cause too much trauma. Let's go to APTA safety record when you owned the business. How many fatalities and aircraft hull losses were there in the course of activities under the AOC when you're in charge and approvals?
Okay, so during the 12 years, now we had minor incidents, wings, scratched wingtips and things like that happens in the flying school, but no, there was no fatalities. We never had anybody spend a night in hospital. We had no hull losses. The business had, and this is the thing, Clinton, you've got to, and this is one of the problems I have in my community, in my local community. So people that I lived here for 57 years. So people in the area know that I had my business closed down by CASA. Okay. Now I don't get the opportunity at footy functions, and I bump into someone in the supermarket or the hairdresser. Nor do I have the inclination to go and explain the whole story to them. But the obvious, people believe when something happens, when CASA takes action against the business, the assumption is that there's a safety matter driving it. Now, this is different, Clinton. Please be assured there is no safety issue, no quality control issues. And based on what CASA told me, and those people I'm sure would repeat that in the right environment, CASA consistently gave me and my management team feedback that we had an industry-leading record of safety and compliance compared to the other schools. That was consistent. There was never, ever any safety concerns. CASA's concern was that the structure was illegal, not a safety concern or a quality control concern. And CASA, and just on that, if there was a safety concern or a quality control concern, CASA would have been suggesting that we put changes in our exposition or in our manuals or change our procedures. CASA never wanted to change anything in our operations manual. All the procedures were sound, designed for what they were doing. We had an impeccable safety record.
Yeah, and I think that's a point worth emphasising, that the reasonable assumption of the punter on the street must be, well, the Civil Aviation Safety Authority must have taken action because of safety concerns. And I think in most of the correspondence, if not all of the correspondence I've seen, the only time the word safety appears is in the name. There's no allegation of safety breaches or safety risks, and you were never investigated by ATSB, or there's no. What do they non-compliance notices or
NCNs?
NCNs?
Look, we'd get our last audit, which was interesting, the last audit of Latrobe Valley, I think the thing that they picked up was that we had to contextualise our Latrobe Valley exam more of the local conditions or something. They were very minor administrative issues. There was never anything structurally raised. They were all minor admin issues that we effectively dealt with on the spot, really.
Yes. Well, as I say, it can't be that there's any substantial safety basis for the action they took. And when you said, yes, they CASA formed the view, someone in CASA, the CASA on the 23rd of October, by that stage, 2018, formed the view that the structure was illegal, notwithstanding that CASA had worked with you to set it up and encourage you to believe that you'd complied with all the requirements by giving you certificates and approvals to do what you were doing. So it's worth emphasising because it's such a baffling. When you think about it, it doesn't make sense. So people are trying to make sense of it by thinking, oh, there must have been a safety issue.
Correct. Yeah.
When there wasn't.
Just on that, Clint, I've written to CASA multiple times over the last 4 years, just asking them to present me with the safety case or the risk assessment or but nothing. And they deliberately avoid it because CASA knows there is no safety issue. I mean, they know that. No,
there was just someone formed a different opinion than the people who had been working with you up to that point in time, and for some reason that opinion prevailed for a while, and then there was the external opinion that said that what you were doing wasn't prohibited or it wasn't precluded, and then we're going to work on giving you contract clauses, and then there was a last minute change again where suddenly these people had to be your employees. So it's clear that CASA might be a single entity, but what was going on inside it was a whole bunch of different people with different opinions going in different directions. Which
I call it the CASA alternating narrative. You know, the story would just change and duck and weave and move. When they hit a brick wall, they'd try something else. It was incredible. Yeah.
So let's talk about the correspondence, the string of correspondence that ended up with you leaving APTA. So you were the owner of APTA, and then you sold it to other people.
Yes.
And you became an employee.
Correct.
Yeah, of the company. So instead of being the sole director and owner and employee, you sold it and you became an employee of just an employee of the company, and it was under the control of other individuals. And then there is a string of correspondence, and I want to go through this just to see the timing and the course of events, and we'll see if I can master the technology again.
Mm-hmm.
And I've looked through this, and it seemed that the relationship between you and CASA and a chap particularly with the name of Jason McKaiser was quite positive and friendly from the start, and then things started to go a bit, shall we say, pear-shaped. So my characterization is that it did start out, the relationship did start out quite positive, and it did remain professional through a couple of things that I'd say. Is that how you characterize it?
Yeah, look, I think, to be honest with you, I think I had a professional relationship with everybody I dealt with at CASA, but it certainly started off that way. Look, I don't know this. I think Jason McKaiser was probably undoubtedly from a bit of pressure from up top to produce some results or to get this thing finalised or to get me out of the picture or something. I don't really know. But my relationship with Mr. McKaiser had been fine.
Yeah, and then Friday, the 12th of April, 2019, I saw this email jump out at me and said, "Dear Mr. Buckley, publishing information on Prune. I understand that you have prepared a package of information regarding your interactions with CASA and have circulated this package within your local network. I further understand that you have stated an intent to publish parts of the package on a publicly accessible website, commonly known as Prune. The package that I have viewed includes allegations of behaviour by named CASA staff and includes a list of staff names and phone numbers." And he says, "I urge you in the strongest possible terms not to publish the package. Should you disregard my advice," that's an interesting word, "should you disregard my advice, you should be aware that your actions may be subject to defamation proceedings and anything that might arise from those proceedings. Blah, blah, blah." Now, I'll talk a little bit about this, but I note that you came back and said, "Cheers, Jason, I understand and I will hold off. Cheers, Glen." So you agreed with his advice. Thanks, Glen. And then you thought about it a bit and then sent this to Jason McKaiser. "I hope the irony is not lost, that it is in fact my reputation, that is Buckley's reputation, that is being trashed by CASA and not the other way around. I can assure you that CASA have pushed me to the limit and the legal threat of defamation causes me no anxiety." And nor would it me, because the letter's quite remarkable. And I want to talk about a couple of things here. I mean, if I'd got that, email, you're much more stoic than I am, Glenn. I can assure you. I would have said, "Dear Jason, get stuffed." That's what I would have said. I mean, if I get a correspondence from a public authority addressed to me, I can do with that correspondence whatever I want to do with it, unless it's some secret, but that wouldn't be emailed to me or whatever. And public officials are prone to be criticised, and there's a reason that threats of defamation proceedings by public officials ring hollow, and that's because I just want to touch on, and I'm not aware of a public official having actually commenced defamation proceedings against a member of the public for defamation, although I did write a nasty gram to someone myself who at one stage. I want to talk about the legal services directions. I don't want to get too bogged down in the detail, but I think it's important for people to understand a couple of things about how the Commonwealth legal services directions work. These are directions made under the legal services directions are made under the Judiciary Act. It's about a direction by the Attorney General as to how Commonwealth and Commonwealth agencies deal with legal matters and get legal services and blah, 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 blah. I won't go into the complexity about which bits of these apply to CASA and which don't. We don't need to, I don't want to break any brains about this, but I just want to focus on an important statement of policy that's in here, because it goes down in this and it says, expenditure is not to be approved to assist an employee to institute proceedings for defamation arising in the course of the performance of their duties, blah, 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 blah. So this is an area in which if a public official thinks they've been defamed by a member of the public, well, they can sue them for defamation, but they're on their own. Right. The public official is in a position like us nobodies, individuals in the public trying to fight a legal fight. They've got to do it they've got to fund it themselves. Right. Which makes the prospect a little bit daunting when you actually have to run your own legal action and fund your own legal action like us nobodies do. And of course, sometimes people run defamation actions, and as Ben Roberts-Smith has found out the very expensive way, sometimes the defamatory imputations are found to be true. But it says at the end of this paragraph, right at the end of that paragraph, it's a very, very important thing that members of the public should understand, and public officials need to be reminded of. Funding defamation proceedings could give rise to a public perception that the government was seeking to prevent legitimate criticism. That's the policy of this. And for public officials who think that they can't be criticised and are getting bent out of shape about criticism, then they're in the wrong job. If they genuinely believe that they have been defamed, then they can do what us nobodies do, and spend their own blood, sweat, and tears to fight it out. So anyway, I looked at that and I thought, okay, well, Glen is being very, very magnanimous about this. And then somewhere in here, let's see, I'm just trying to get down to the point where a chap resigned as the head of operations, and you stepped in as and I'm just going to have to get back to that other list of documents, where someone in APTA named Ermin Javier.
Yes, correct.
And what position did he resign from?
Well, we had a lot of redundancy built into the system, Clinton. Sorry, I won't dwell on this too much, but we had a lot of redundancy in the system because we had a lot of bases depending on our continued operations and the key personnel positions. So we had Ermin was a CASA approved CEO and a CASA approved head of operations. I was a CASA approved head of operations and a CASA approved CEO. And then we had 2 CASA approved safety managers. So that was the key personnel position. So we effectively had there's no such thing as a deputy who, really. There's no such position in the legislation. You're either like being pregnant or not pregnant. You can't be a little bit of it. So basically, you're a head of operations. And the terminology that we more generally used was the alternate who. So because it was a 24-hour operation we were running, it might be that I would be the who at night time, Ermin would be the who during the daytime, on weekends, and we would roster those positions. So we were both approved head of operations for the organisation to give it redundancy. We had a third person doing a 12-month training program to give us a third head of operations to further increase that redundancy. Now, what had happened, this head of operations was a magnificent staff member, been with me for many, many years. His loyalty was towards me, I believe. With the change of ownership and change of culture of the company, he felt he didn't want to continue, so he resigned, yes.
Right. So at that point, this is by the 30th of June. This is after the point at which you had sold the business, as it were.
This is the day, I think. I think this is the day, actually, the end of the financial year, June 30. And just on that, when we say sold as well, I just want to clarify something just for the listeners. I didn't sell the business. Okay, what I did is I walked out of the business. I had about $200,000 worth of debt. I'd used up all of my own money. I'd used up all of my parents' money. I was in negotiations. My parents wanted to give me more money. I just didn't want to take any more money. We had about $200,000 of debt. And I basically said to the new owners, I walked away with not a cent. I said, if you just pay all the debt and make sure everybody gets paid in full, no haggling, just pay everybody in full, and I'll walk away from the business. And I literally walked out the door. Yeah.
And so this chap gives notice that he's stepping down as the role. Correct. And then you notify CASA.
Yes.
On the Monday, 1 July.
Yes.
The intention would be for me to step into the role after Ermin's departure, as I am the approved standby HOO. As you say, you're already qualified to do that. And there's another person named there who has completed an induction process. and that's the person that you were training up
Yes.
for that particular role. Yeah. Okay. Well, all that makes sense. So at that point, you're effectively the head of operations.
Yeah. Well, I guess because there was two roles. I was an employee when I was the owner of the business, and I just stayed on as an employee of the business. And in actual fact, as you would expect, when NASA was taking over the business, he didn't come from a flight training background and didn't hold a flight instructor rating. So the natural thing would be that they would expect me to stay on. In fact, it was one of the conditions of sale was that I did remain on. One of the conditions was I did remain with the business. So I was just continuing with the business, whereas there was two head of operations. Previously, we were going to go into a situation where there's one head of operations.
Yes.
The third person who was being Jackie, who had done the 12-month induction, she was ready to step into the role, but CASA had placed an administrative freeze on the whole business for the last 8 or 9 months. So we weren't able to upgrade Jackie. She was ready, but just we couldn't post key personnel. CASA put an administrative freeze, so she was basically just waiting for CASA to lift the freeze.
And then we get to the 18th of July, and there was a discussion. Jason writes to APTA CEO and then you as HOO. There's a meeting on Tuesday, and there's still ongoing discussions about the legal basis for operations of affiliate organisations. So we're in July. All of this is going. In the interim, CASA is willing to consider granting an approval to affiliate organisation. CASA is also willing to consider a mechanism, a prerequisite.
So I want to go back because that's an interesting point, actually. If you could go back to where it talks about the 141 approval, and I want to make sure people understand this as well. There's talks in there that they'll issue in the interim, CASA is willing to consider granting an approval to affiliate organisations under 141035 until the end of October to remove the legal uncertainty in relation to current operations. Now, that's a 141 approval, Clinton. We were a 142 organisation, okay? That approval effectively took away 95% of my revenue because it stopped me being able to continue developing part 142. Almost all of our students were 142 training, the higher, more complex training. So a 141035 approval basically said, look, Glen, you can keep doing 3 to 5% of your business. The other 95%'s off the table. And I think this is something the Ombudsman didn't understand as well. I think the Ombudsman didn't understand the difference between 141 and 142. It is complicated, but the implications of it are that's a 141 approval, not a 142.
Yeah. Well, but again, there's still no certainty as to exactly what the way forward is. Now, again, I just want to flick down to these emails where there's a bunch of emails where there'd obviously been a conversation between Jason McKaiser, I think, in CASA and the new CEO, where there was a discussion about your employment being untenable.
Yes.
What's your recollection of that state of affairs?
Well, that was quite bizarre. It was. I remember I was over at the APTA head office, and I was chatting to. I had no idea this was coming. I was just continuing on as an employee of the business. After I lost my flying school by now, Melbourne flight training, I was basically needed full-time employment. So they kept me on. NASA, the new owner, came over to the APTA building because he was based in a different building. I think it was I remember it was getting a little bit dark, so it might have been sort of 4, 5 o'clock, early evening anyway. I don't know, 5, 6 o'clock. It was early evening. But anyway, NASA came over and he had his laptop with him. And he just turned around the laptop and showed me the email from Jason McKaiser. I can't remember his exact words. He was something like, I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do. He didn't say my hands are tied. It was nothing. And he gave me a bit of a look of frustration. Now, there was a witness there as well. I was chatting to a friend of mine for the air ambulance who was there when this all unfolded, but he basically moved the laptop around, showed me the email. I asked him if I could have a copy of that email from CASA, which he provided for me.
Yeah, well, here it is on screen. This is Tuesday, the 27th of August, 2019, 22:14 p.m. Hi, NASA. I understand that Mr. Buckley remains as APTA Deputy HOO. This is no longer tenable with the comments that Mr. Buckley is making publicly. Please confirm APTA's intention in relation to Mr. Buckley as Deputy HOO. Now, that's asking, that bit asks what APTA intends to do about your employment as Deputy HOO. And then it says, and whether Mr. Buckley is authorised to speak on behalf of APTA. Yeah, so I understand Mr. Buckley remains as APTA Deputy HOO. This is no longer tenable with the comments that Mr. Buckley is making publicly. And we'll get to the apology from Mr. McIsa and what the ICC said about this. But here we've got someone effectively saying, and as the ICC said, the plain reading of this is they're saying, because he's making public comments that I don't like, you can't employ him anymore as Deputy HOO. And that, from what you've described to me, is the factual circumstances in which that email was shown to you by the recipient of the email, and what subsequently happened. I don't think there's much any way other than that you can interpret it reasonably. And I'll say that because I've got a bit of a wicked sense of humour, and whether Mr. Buckley is authorised to speak on behalf of APTA, well, surely given what they say, what CASA says about employees being in all respects agents of the employer, CASA should have known the answer to that, because you're an employee and therefore you are in all respects an agent for, and they should have known the answer. But in fact, he got it right, and that's because employees aren't in all respects agents for the employer, and sometimes it's worth checking an employee's actual or ostensible versus ostensible authority. So anyway, that
just before we move on again, Clinton, just want to point out here as well that this is a legislated. The three key personnel in a 142 organisation are the CASA-approved CEO, the CASA-approved head of operations, and the CASA-approved safety manager. So this is a position that requires CASA approval for me to sit in that role. CASA have an regular enforcement procedures manual, I believe it's called, but the manual stipulates very, very clear procedures if CASA is to take that approval off of somebody or determine that they're not a fit and proper person. This is just a complete bypass of all of the requirements under administrative law and my rights, procedural fairness, natural. It's obscene. I mean, the procedures are very clearly laid out. And the enforcement procedures manual also tells CASA that in these events, when they're going to do something like this, the first person they should contact is the employee affected, not the employer. That's in the manual. So the first I've known about it, they've gone straight to my employer. These aren't criteria for fit and proper person. They're making comments publicly on PPRU, and that's ridiculous. If I was telling people to fly planes into the side of a building or to do dodgy maintenance or to fly fatigue, those are the things that would determine I'm not a fit and proper person, not defending me, my employees, my staff, suppliers publicly on a discrete forum such as PPRU or anti-PRU. Yeah,
well, as I said, we'll see that the ICC says it's not CASA's job to censor people and public debate, and I will criticise if I want to say that Jason McIsa is, in my opinion, incompetent. I'll say it, and he can stamp his little feet and hold his breath until his face turns blue, and I don't care. And I assume that in this set of circumstances, the new owners of the company are trying to survive, and they're pretty keen to keep CASA on side.
Oh, well, absolutely. I mean, they're in the situation where they've taken over this business. They don't have any, he doesn't come from a flying instructor background, so he doesn't have the technical ability, I guess, to sort of take CASA on. So he's going to be very, very submissive. The business is still operating under an interim approval. So the business that is just taking control of it, a whim, CASA can just say, as they kept threatening me, it's just not continuing. So he's in a very, very difficult situation. And yeah, very, very compliant with CASA, I would suggest.
Yeah. Well, and I'll get down to, so then there's an apology from Mr. McKaiser. I had a telephone conversation with APTA's new CEO. Mr. Quashir advised that statements you make in relation to matters concerning your personal experience with Civil Aviation Safety Authority should be not regarded as communications reflecting the view or position of APTA. On the following day, I was provided with a copy of an email from you addressed to the Prime Minister, among others, which included remarks of the kind mentioned above under your signature as APTA's Deputy Head of Operations in an APTA signature block. So he's trying to make something out of you using APTA's signature block. That's a matter for APTA. If you're acting beyond the scope of your actual authority, that's for APTA to worry about, not someone official in CASA whose job it is, safety is their job, not worrying what the Deputy Prime Minister's being told by people. And if he thought it was personally defamatory of him, Mr. McKaiser could have taken you on for defamation. I sent an email seeking his confirmation as whether you were employed by APTA as Deputy HOO, as your signature block indicated, and whether you were not authorised to speak on behalf of APTA in that capacity. In the circumstances, I found the designation of your status in the email you sent to the Prime Minister to be inconsistent with the assurances Mr. Quashir had previously provided. Well, who cares? I don't know what McKaiser cares. I mean, what's the safety issue? What's the safety issue? And if there's something inaccurate in there that the Prime Minister quizzes Mr. McKaiser about, Mr. McKaiser can clarify it. This is my reference to the untenability of the situation was intended as a reflection of what I consider to be the impropriety of your remarks appearing to have been made on APTA's behalf without the apparent knowledge or endorsement of the APTA CEO. Well, that's not Mr. McKaiser's concern, and that's not what the plain words in the email said. I'll touch on his. I'll go across to the Industry Complaints Commissioner's short letter after you complained to him. And again, the Industry Complaints Commissioner continues to impress with the way in which he gets into the nitty-gritty at this. At this stage, I'll just go focus on the key paragraph. I propose to conclude that CASA's email was unreasonable and appropriate. That's because the email's most natural meaning draws a correlation between the statements you may have made publicly and the tenability of your employment when no such connection exists. And this is the important lesson for public officials, because I respectfully agree with the CASA ICC. CASA has no proper role in censoring public debate or comment on its operations, as the email may have inferred. Okay, we are all entitled, and if I write to the Prime Minister and sign off as the CEO of Qantas, that's not CASA's business. If they think there's a safety issue in that, they can pursue it. And if the Deputy Prime Minister, the Prime Minister's concerned about who I am, they can chase that up. But in any event, CASA has no proper role in censoring public debate or comment on its operations, as the email may have inferred. I don't think, but he's strongly urging you and advising you not to publish stuff because it's defamatory and there's all these fallout. I don't think there's any inference, or it's as you said, the natural meaning of the words. But in any event, let's finally move on, because I wanted this to be a nice short one. Finally, to estimates or hearing of the inquiry into general aviation that was run by a Senate committee, and it appears to have drifted to nothing. But in the course of giving evidence in that inquiry, Mr. Carmody, the then CEO of CASA, said that Glen Buckley had assaulted his staff and this CASA staff and had stalked CASA staff, and quite frankly, Mr. Carmody was sick of it. Now, have you ever been charged with assaulting or stalking anyone, or have you been approached by police and interviewed about any allegations like that?
No. Please be assured, Clinton, I have never in my life stalked or assaulted anybody. Nobody's even ever made that. The first I knew of the allegation was when Mr. Carmody got up there before the Senate and said it, and I was like, what? It's just part of the tactics of damaging my character, my reputation. No, I'll be very clear. I have never, ever stalked or assaulted anybody, including any CASA employee. It's a blatant lie.
Yeah, because it's one of the many astonishing aspects of this, because if it actually happened to public officials in their public capacity, I'm just, how could it just simply be not pursued if it happened in fact? In a previous life, I can refer to prosecutions that which are the subject of press releases by by the DPP of people who had obstructed an official of an agency in the conduct of their duties. It's a criminal code offence, and it was prosecuted, and the person was convicted, and the agency published that saying, look, please don't get in our way. You can't obstruct public, because it's a very, very serious thing. And for Mr. Carmody to say, represent that it happened, and then no action to be taken against it, it's just extraordinary.
It obviously didn't happen, Clinton, because if any employer, if somebody stalked or assaulted one of my employees, I'd be all over it and leaping to their defence, as CASA would be. Had I have stalked and assaulted somebody, the police would have contacted me. There'd be a police report. There'd be footage. It's just not true.
Yeah. Anyway, on that note, we'll end the broadcast. I assume what you're waiting for now is a response from the CASA CEO about a meeting with her, and if that's going to happen, when it's going to happen, who's going to go along. So yes. I'm assuming that when you get that information, you'll let us know, and we'll look forward to keeping everyone updated on progress.
Yeah, absolutely. As soon as I hear, I'll be straight onto the two websites, Anti-Pru and also onto P-Pru, to get that up there, and I'll let you know. But I'm very much looking forward to hearing back from Miss Spence, I can assure you.
You might get an email from someone saying, I strongly suggest and advise you not to publish this stuff. Anyway, I'm
out of their reaches now.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'll say good evening, and keep fighting the good fight, and try to stay strong.
Cheers, and thanks everyone for all your support, Anti-Pru, P-Pru, and everybody out there, you, Clinton, everybody. Cheers, everybody. Thank you so much. All the best.